Hello, my name is Ashley Purpura, and I'm an associate professor of religion at Purdue University and the co-editor of the Orthodox Christianity and Contemporary Thought book series with Fordham University Press. I'd like to welcome you this morning to this installment of Women Scholars of Orthodox Christianity, which is one of the many initiatives of the Orthodox Christian Studies Center at Fordham University. The Fordham Center facilitates, funds, and publishes scholarship on the Orthodox Christian world, broadly conceived. To learn more about the center, its initiatives, or publications, please visit the website at www.fordham.edu/orthodoxy. We would also encourage you to follow the center on YouTube, click like and subscribe on our programming, and share this and other videos with anyone who you think might benefit from it. I'm joined today by our guests and featured scholars, Reverend Dr. Gabrielle Thomas and Dr. Elena Narinskaya. The Reverend Dr. Gabrielle Thomas is Assistant Professor of Early Christianity and Anglican Studies at Emory University. In addition to authoring a significant number of journal articles, chapters, and reviews, she has published 3 books, The Image of God and the Theology of Gregory Nazianzus, Women and Ordination in the Orthodox Church, Explorations in Theology and Practice, which we'll be discussing a little bit here today, and For the Good of the Church, Unity, Theology, and Women. An ordained priest in the Church of England, she has served churches as both a lay and ordained leader. As a committed ecumenist, she serves on the Anglican and Oriental Orthodox International Commission. Dr. Elena Narinskaya is the Spalding Research Fellow in Comparative Religion at Cambridge University. Her main research interest lies in the area of scriptural studies, biblical exegesis within the context of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. She has previously worked with early Jewish Christian interpretations of Exodus in the 4th century Syria and Palestine, and published her first book on the basis of her PhD in 2010. Since then, she has started researching the Quranic presentation of the Exodus stories. She recently submitted her 3rd monograph to Routledge on the stories of Moses in Jewish, Christian, and Muslim sources. She has held numerous international research positions, and since December 2018, she has been an associate member of the theology department at the University of Oxford. Welcome to you both and to everyone joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your invite.
Our format today is similar to those in other episodes in this series. I'll start us off with some questions for discussion for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So please do feel free to put any questions that you might have for those of us joining us for our guests by clicking the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to as many as we can before the end. So I'd like to start us off by asking you both to share with us a little bit about your background and what drives your scholarly interests.
Elena, do you want to go first?
Sure. As Ashley elaborately introduced, my prime and the most beloved area of academic interest is biblical exegesis, which I find useful on professional level and on personal one. But my other love is the Women's Ministries Initiative, of which I'm a founding director. And this is how Gabby and I came together as friends and scholars, colleagues and co-authors of the book on ordination of women. So the Women's Ministries Initiative, and I think I'll concentrate on that, I think it's more applicable to our webinar today, is an educational forum for basically self-educating the participants of each webinar, whether they're presenters or participants. And also by publishing this book, for example, is the outward mission or our work that we do. And we basically take important questions, not exclusively on women ordination, but about Orthodox Church, about Christianity, about the relationship with God, about anthropology, anything else that is interesting. But we're not shying from difficult questions. And that's why on the 5th anniversary of the initiative, we held this conference on women ordination in the Orthodox Church, where Gabby was a presenter and I was a facilitator. So I'll better stop here just to leave it for further discussions. It's on to Gabby.
Thank you. So it's really lovely to do this with a friend, I have to say. It's the first time I've shared a webinar in this way, and it's fantastic to see, Elena. So I guess if I was going to put a label on myself, I would say that I'm a historical theologian. And so the interests that I'm driven by are sort of the questions that overlap history and theology. And because of being ordained, I suppose, and also just because of being a Christian, I have an interest in the life of the church today. And so what drives me most, I think, is the conversation between those two things and where those meet, and where texts and sources from the past might actually bring to bear some insight on some of the questions and issues that we wrestle with today in the life of the church. I also enjoy looking at the things that not everyone wants to look at. I find that very, very satisfying, sort of being the person that points out the elephant in the room, so to speak.
I think that in what I've read that you've written, you do that very optimistic, kind of hopeful way, in a way that okay, there may be this big problem or this question that's hard to wrestle with, but ultimately there are answers, there are resources to address it. So I appreciate that in the work that at least has come through in this more recent volume. Elena, I appreciate you mentioning the Women's Ministry Initiative, which is, as you wrote in the introduction, sponsored this 2018 conference where the volume kind of emerged and began to take shape. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about putting together the volume, Women in Ordination in the Orthodox Church, kind of the topics that you selected and the areas that you chose to focus on for that conversation.
Thank you. I think I have to step one step earlier as why did this Women Ministry Initiative originate and what's its goals and purposes? And I think it originated from a life of an active member of the Orthodox Church, of which I hope and consider myself to be. And looking around and listening to people around, it felt organic and necessary and needed to open, or rather follow on following or previous initiatives of women talking about not necessarily exclusively women issues, but sort of leading, being an unusual role in the Orthodox Church. As originator, masterminds, or as you wish. We have so many educated women, so many educated men, theological capacity of an Orthodox or Christian church and nowadays is probably abundant. So it sounds almost inviting to bring people together. And on the 5th year of the Women's Ministry Initiative, it felt like we're ready to tackle the question that is the elephant in the room, so to speak, and it's provoking. But the whole reason for this conference was non-provoking, non-confrontational, non-inflaming, but honest and deep and thoughtful. So the main criteria for inviting people was solid scholars and honest, people who are willing to share, being open to discussing questions, not running and changing everything and creating yet another revolution. That's the most fearful opponents presuppose and label whoever talks about women, and God forbid in the conversation with women and ordination in the Orthodox Church. But I think all of our conferences, and especially this book, is about airing the question yet again. So, decade after a decade, we sort of attempt to air this question. I mean, one way or another, sometimes it's maybe inviting for a next step, but at the moment we're still airing, and hence our book, it's only due to the huge efforts of Gabby that saw the face of the earth, because she's the powerhouse. She's a powerhouse of that publication. She had a vision, and I had hope, a placid hope. Gabby took the initiative, and this is what we took a power of initiative of a woman. And I'm not meaning myself, I'm meaning Gabi. She took the initiative, she found the publisher, we started expanding our authors pool. We went far and beyond the conference. In the conference, we had amazing people like Metropolitan Callistus, Gabi herself, and Father Andrew Louth, good solid scholars. So we went into Father John Bear, we went to all the women scholars in the United States that we could approach and abroad. But I'll better let the mastermind behind the book to talk further.
I'd say it really needed the two of us, because this whole vision wouldn't have come about had Elena not set up the Women's Ministries Initiative. So I want to be very clear about that. I think the book was mostly, I was sat in the conference that day listening to all of these great scholars whose work I have read because I study Gregory of Nazianzus, and just thinking, my goodness, this is just too good to contain here within these people in this room in Oxford. What these men and women are saying is just too valuable for this conversation, not to be spread out. But at the same time, I think neither of us wanted to sort of change the tone of what we had in that room on that day. So we didn't want it to become confrontational in a way that's divisive, which then just shuts down the conversation. It was a particularly unique experience for me to be part of a group of people talking about this without getting angry and shouting at each other. And I think that was sort of our goal, really, that would be reflected in the book, and why we approached it from so many different angles, because this isn't just one problem that can be approached, I think, in one way, because it involves such a complex set of theological questions and issues and practices. So yeah, that was what was going on behind all of that. But I had a 3-line whip with all of our authors, mostly because it was one of those things where I think we both felt that it wasn't the sort of book that would work if we took a decade over it, because it was very much fresh in everyone's minds from the conference. And so it was a case of, okay, we just need to get on with this. And whilst there's lots more that we could have done, and I mean, lots of other people, scholars, and questions we could have asked. But at that point in time, partly due to our participants as well, and various things that were going on in different people's lives, we just wanted to get it out. So that was certainly my goal in pushing it through, was we just need to have this out and unpublished.
Absolutely. And I think it does raise, even though it's raising a question that's been asked before, it raises it in a new light, and it shows also people's perspectives shifting over time. And, I think that's mentioned in the introduction with Callistus Ware's position on women's ordination and that type of thing. So I think pushing it out maybe expediently, obviously, I think worked in your favor to kind of raise these very current issues and the maybe cutting edge research and resources that are available that are still deeply rooted in that historical tradition and theology of the church. In the introduction, and I think you mentioned this a little bit, drawing on these different types of contributors, you mentioned that the volume draws on work by Lutheran, Catholic, and Anglican theologians in the hope of an ecumenical conversation about women's gifts and status across all traditions. Can you say a little bit more about the importance of the ecumenical insights for informing our, meaning I guess Orthodox, understanding of women's ministries in the church? Especially as in the Orthodox context, sometimes there's a resistance to ecumenical insights as kind of being outside or not germane to particular Orthodox things. And I think it's woven together beautifully in this volume. So maybe you could say a little bit more about kind of the ecumenical aspect to putting it together.
So I'm going to let Elena speak for the Orthodox Church. As the Anglican participant in all of this, I think for me it was really important because this is not an Orthodox problem. Whilst we have ordination in the Church of England for women, that doesn't mean that it's easy for women who are ordained in the Church of England simply because they're ordained, that it's not a case of, oh, well, it's all good and equal now then. There's still sexual harassment. There's still so many different issues that come along with that. And I think certainly from my perspective, flipping it over, it was a case of wanting this to be clear that this is not everyone else saying, oh, look, there's a few things the Orthodox Church really needs to get right here because we've all sussed it out, because that's just not how it is. And so I think partly, certainly from my end of where I was coming from with this, was I wanted other traditions to be able to enter into this conversation in order to be able to reflect each one on our own sort of, where is there room for improvement? Where are the live questions for us in all of this? Rather than simply thinking, oh, well, you know, we ecumenists out here, we have all the answers because we've already ordained women, so we'll just nicely pat ourselves on the back. It's just so far from the reality of what it actually is. And so I was hoping for far more of a conversation than a sort of aiming to fix. Yeah. Wonderful. And Elena.
Thank you. Actually, you mentioned that Orthodox people do often practice resistance, and I think resistance is one of our special gifts in the Orthodox Church. We certainly do have many other beautiful gifts, and one of the I think strong points of Orthodoxy is its conservatism. Its ability to conserve and to accumulate, and to build on tradition, and to dwell on tradition, and to dig into it. And I believe that the capacity of the Orthodox Church over the centuries allows us to find answers to every challenge of modernity, and to further develop this wonderful tradition that we're inheriting. So rather than being scared and overprotective of our a very resilient and very beautiful church, we rather use our energy to chip in and to dwell on its experience and to dig deep into it to understand the current important issues that can no longer be ignored, so to speak, be it, you know, environmental science or gender, or any other issues, you know, COVID, anything. I believe if we look deep into ourselves, into our voice of God within ourselves, and listen to the voice of tradition, and to listen to our legacy, we are able to withstand the difficulties, whatever they are. You know, I don't believe we are that fragile to be damaged by any difficulty that we're surrounded, and even problems. You know, if we have problems in the church, there's no point carpeting it. It's very important to talk about it on a psychological level, on an ecclesiastical level, on so many other levels. And talking is the first step to listening, to understanding, to discussing. And that's why we need other people. That's why we need other experiences in the church. Not that they will diminish our own, but they will encourage it and enrich it. And in the issue of women ministries or women ordination, we have a luxury not to be the first on the forefront. So we can learn from the experience of a half a century or even more of the Anglican Church, for example, and see what's the, you know, detrimental points and do it better, so to speak. So in that way, we will, well, in my view, it's better to celebrate the different experiences. And my experience of inter-Abrahamic studies showed that learning about Judaism is enriching my personal understanding as an Orthodox Christian. Learning about Islam enriches me with my relationship with my God, and it just evolves me into a better and to more understanding human being and a Christian, and so on and so forth. And that's why I think when we talk with others, and most importantly, when we listen to ourselves, to our church, to our God, to our environment, to our society, to our 21st century with its communications, then we evolve into a better human beings, into better Christians, and hopefully we bring a better church for ourselves and for the people after us.
Thank you for those powerful and theologically strong insights, Elena. I want to say amen to that. That there really is, I think, sometimes a fear, right, that kind of pushes Orthodox Christians away of, oh no, tradition will change, opposed to kind of what you said of this kind of digging deep into tradition and engaging with others out, maybe outside or beyond what we might conceive of as kind of Orthodox tradition, to learn from that and help that reflect and develop our own engagement with the world, modernity, through our own resources. So I think that was very well put by you. The volume has a lot of diversity in it. It includes 12 chapters by male and female priests, scholars, and theologians, including 2 by yourselves. In addition to the introduction, the chapters have significantly varied approaches, engaging the question of women's ordination. So there's an emphasis on anthropology, the priesthood, and contemporary practices, women's diaconate. I wonder if you might speak to areas of agreement or potential disagreement among those chapters that, if you think maybe if they're brought into further dialogue, might be particularly productive.
I think it was important for us that people come with the whole spectrum of opinions. We didn't want to lobby absolutely anything, because that doesn't bring any good to an academic conversation, to a human encounter. And we were not there to pretend or to stage anything. I think variety is powerful. It's powerful because we valued our readers. We gave them opportunity to think, which is a very powerful ability and an opportunity. And because we were rather confident in our traditions, in our legacy, we didn't fear. We just presented it. There's no objectivity in the world. We were not aiming for that. In fact, we were, if anything, we were aiming for subjectivity, because the dialogue, we wanted to talk and we wanted to listen to others, whatever they have to say. And it was, although surprising, that there was a unity in this book. People were deep thinkers. They were not pushing for anything, but they were able to bring a discussion into a very important aspects of anthropology, theology, practice, biblical studies. Those are the powerful tools that we were giving to our readers to ponder, to explore further. It mostly is a tool, our book, and we're mostly giving it to Orthodox or non-Orthodox, curious and open readers, to make their own opinions, whatever they are, and to stand by them or to see how they evolve with time. There is a possibility to change and to change one's opinion if one is honest within oneself in whatever direction. We personally have, well, we tried actually to not push for personal agendas. What we tried to do is to vocalize a certain important questions for the discussion and to bring it out for further discussion. And Gabby, if you want to carry on, please.
Well, I'm wondering, I don't think we made it explicit, but I think if you were a very careful reader, you might notice that there are different approaches to what it means both to be human and then what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a woman who is a priest. And whether that's something distinctive or whether it isn't something distinctive. Mm-hmm. And so when those voices are missing from the table, is it because they're women's voices or because their people's voices that are missing from the table. I think that's something that would be really, really fruitful to pursue, because we definitely didn't attempt to resolve that with this book in any way, shape or form. And it wasn't really the first question I think either of us were asking. But certainly as I was reading through different chapters, I was thinking, this could be a really interesting conversation to sit down now with X and have. I wonder what they would do if I push them back on this. And I think that could be really, really helpful, because I think it's something that certainly within our book we don't resolve. And I think it even more broadly in theological anthropology, there are just still so many different questions around what we do with this. And then I think the question of what it means to be a priest as well. So Andrew Louth sort of raised that we need to think about it and began to in his chapter. But again, that's, so much more then to be discussed on the basis of what he raised. And I think, again, you would find areas of disagreement over what that means, even amongst the contributors of the book who are Orthodox, let alone put in the rest of us. But I think they certainly be conversations that I would be interested in pursuing further, that's for sure.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of the chapters take different starting points about is the issue of ordination grounded in theology of the priesthood, or the theology of the diaconate even, or is it grounded in these kind of anthropological or scriptural kind of teachings and theology? And so I think, there's a lot of diversity there. Even what's the starting point for having this conversation and the resources we might marshal forward to address it. I wonder if you each might share with us briefly, maybe a summary about your own chapters that you contributed to the volume, and just share with us how you chose to address and contribute to this conversation, drawing on your own disciplines and experiences.
Well, the chapter on Eve's curse was my choice for the book, or rather, Gabby encouraged me to write the chapter, and I'm very, very grateful that she did. Again, it's not exclusively an Orthodox problem about these dynamics and the anthropology of it and physicality of it, so to speak, but it seems to dwell longer than 21 centuries in the Orthodox Church, and all the churches have seen the shift in relaxing purity laws, prohibitions for menstruating women, and so on. So I was trying to go through a biblical narrative and sort of to read it from the perspective of a 21st century educated woman, of which I try to consider myself and educate further to live up to the self-definition, so to speak. Because there is this strange tension in the Orthodox Church when we're not almost, it's very difficult to put into the words, but we need to put a different hat when we enter the church as a woman, whether it's a conservative dress or the pious, and these visuals and this symbolism. I'm not diminishing the power and the importance of this, is often something external. So I was trying to look into the inner core understanding of what is it about Christianity and being a woman in a Christian church, and how do we address those inheritance of the past, of ritual impurity laws. Do we inherit them from Judaism, and then they penetrate Orthodox Christianity, and how do we deal with them from the Orthodox Christian point of view? There's been tons written about it, so I don't think I'm just contributing to the conversation. It's very tricky conversation, and but I think my greatest hope, and my greatest hope again and again, is for people to start educating themselves in the depth and width of the Orthodox legacy and the freedom that it gives. Freedom, and freedom always comes with responsibility. So once you learn about the incredible capacity of being a woman in the Orthodox Church, being a man in the Orthodox, being an Orthodox Christian, being a Christian, being a believer, and you engage in dialogue within yourself, with others, with God, with the Church, it brings so much more richness into one's life. When you don't hide away and pretend or defend yourself from, God forbid, the dangers of whatever, all dangers are there very helpful. All problems are actually an opportunity to learn, to repent, and to change one's life. The repentance, as metanoia, is a change rather than anything else. We change, we purify ourselves, we bring ourselves closer to God, but also to other people and to ourselves, which is probably the greatest challenge of all anyway. So this is really the tool for others to carry on thinking about the subjects and to bring them in their own minds, in their own conversations, in their churches, and to try to live up to the 21st century opportunities for the church to become a better place, a purer place, a cleaner place, clean from fears, from not understanding, lack of education, and so on and so forth.
Wonderful. And I appreciate that you point out this kind of duality that's sometimes performed by 21st century women of, engaging in kind of, very egalitarian kind of workforce in some places, or, dressing a certain way, and then performing perhaps a different identity when they go into church. And so there's wrestling, and some of that is both kind of I don't want to say imposed, but taught and internalized. And then other things come from that tension that's maybe misunderstood in the church about women's bodies being impure, some sort of inherited shame that is still very much gendered and maybe not fully lifted. So I think attending to that Eve's curse, as you put it, definitely still continues warrants our attention. Gabrielle, would you like to share with us a little bit about your chapter?
Sure. So this was really the opening talk of the day. And I remember when I received Elena's program thinking, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm going to kick off this day. How on earth do I do this? Because I didn't want to set the tone then for a sort of provocative day going on in an unhelpful way. And I was conscious that I would be speaking to mostly people who don't have women presiding at the Eucharist on Sundays and through the week and that kind of thing. And I thought, well, I don't want to do this as an apology for the ministry that I have. So how do I best reflect on it? And to be honest, all through my PhD, that was on Gregory of Nazianzus. And I'm probably more formed by that particular theologian than I am for any other part of any reading that I've ever done. And I thought, well, I could just have a conversation with what he says he does and use that as the basis of reflecting on how I understand some of the things that I'm involved with doing, rather than simply sort of focusing on who I am or who I am as a woman and that kind of thing. So I thought it could get very quickly sidetracked. So I looked at vocation as gift, simply because of really the approach that he has all the way through his work of creation as gift, and gift to us, and reflecting on what it was like for me to receive that gift in a way that I'm conscious that Orthodox women who might be being called by the Spirit to this kind of ministry can't receive this gift right now. And so to sort of raise the question that way, and then moved through the fact that for him it's all about theology, obviously, and the doing of theology, and that's really important to me too in the way that I am a priest and the way that I exercise my ministry. And then moving through some different areas of healing and reconciliation and leadership, but all in conversation with various different texts that had inspired me to think about how I'm doing what I'm doing and how I'm becoming the person that I'm becoming, really, within all of that. And so it was a sense to which I was sort of finding a point of a conversation that people could touch on to, because lots of people on that day, that conference, are familiar with Gregory of Nazianzus and all the wealth that he brings. And so it was sort of a way of saying, okay, so there's some common ground, and it's in this inspiring and long-suffering theologian here, and sort of finding a way to have the conversation with those texts, as well as with the sort of what I'm doing now as well, and what I'm doing within today. So talking about what it's like to baptize, what it's like to preside at the Eucharist, that kind of thing. I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed doing it. It was utterly terrifying when Elena first asked, because I thought, oh my goodness, this could go so badly wrong. But it really was an incredible joy, both to think about it and to be challenged, but also then to go forward and actually say something positive about what it means to be a priest for me today.
Wonderful. And I think you're very strategic in tackling it in this very patristic way for kind of a Orthodox, maybe majority audience, but then keeping, your own experience as part of that, which it's kind of like a feminist theologian kind of approach there to yoke those two together. So I think that's very well thought out on your part. I'm going to ask one final question before we turn to the Q&A. So again, I'll encourage anyone viewing, if you have questions, to go ahead and put those in the Q&A box. So my last question perhaps is one that's too broad, but I'll still ask you to respond with your thoughts on it. Based on the insights of this volume and the conference that preceded it, how do you think the Orthodox Church might best begin or continue to move forward on the issue of women's ordination? What do you think, or what do you see as potential barriers to continued dialogue and potential action on the topic of women and ordination in the Orthodox Church? And are there any additional ecumenical insights that might be particularly helpful in continuing to address this issue?
Thank you. That is a very broad and a very complex question, and I'll try my best to address a few points. And I think one of the questions that we can ask as Orthodox people here is, what is it about the Orthodox Church today lacking female priesthood? What is its message and what is its essence? How does it reflect its theology, its ecclesiology, its pastoral dimension? What are the optics of 100% male clergy, and what missionary message, internal mission and external mission, does it send? On the other hand, what is the symbolism of it for neophytes or for people there, and how does optics, symbolism can potentially reflect on a popular theology of people practicing it on a daily level and looking at it from the distance? Of course, historically, the questions have to be addressed. And, in the current time of COVID and the novelty of it, just because it's happening or happened the first time in the history, there's nothing to be afraid of. History is evolving, there are new challenges. So just because it hasn't happened in the past or hasn't been looked in at the past doesn't mean that we cannot look at it and discuss about it in the present. And in the final point, perhaps, the pros and cons of this feared ordination of women. What is it? The division of the church is the greatest fear, I suppose. How can we try and avoid it? Can we look in the preparations of the Council of 1917? Never happened in Russia due to the revolution, when their suggestions, their pastoral suggestion was, don't implement it as a hardcore scenario for everyone. Give people opportunity to experience in one parish ordained female priest, in another parish, and give people a choice if there is no contradiction theologically. So dig into theology, but as a prose, I would dwell more on what Gabby said about gifts, receiving gifts, but also giving the gifts. The opportunity for women, which are, again, optically almost, well, what I've seen are a vast majority of the attendees in the Orthodox Church, I would say 90% in some, giving the opportunity for women to share their gifts with the church, and for the church to encourage and invite those gifts in the church. And I'm not just saying the singular gift of priesthood, or we are all called for these gifts. We're all holy priesthood according to the order of Melchizedek. This is deeply penetrated within our biblical legacy, within our liturgical tradition. We're all receiving holy gifts as a holy people, every single liturgy on the anaphora, if we choose to understand what we're actually participating in and study the liturgy. So there's nothing prohibitive about being a priest. It's everything about living up to that calling, about living up to that gift and rising up, not hiding away for it, pretending and finding the reasons why not to, but actually inviting God's calling to the church, ongoing. So I think education on a personal level, on the parish level, and on the level of the entire church as the body of people, learning by practicing theology, actively practicing theology by attending church, listening, praying, and loving people. That's the only thing. The greatest gift that we received from Christ is the gift of love, sacrificial love, which we could hardly live up to. But, let's start from the small beginnings. Let's stop rejecting and hating opinions just because they don't correlate with others, just because they're not exactly like others, just because they're not orthodox in our view. But perhaps, our views are a bit constrained, and orthodoxy is much larger, is much more inviting and much more free than we try to squeeze it and to believe in. And that's why perhaps staying a little bit open on every level, which is an exercise of a daily capacity. So I better stop here.
Well, you give us a lot to think about there. Gabrielle, would you like to add?
I guess I feel like I have less right to comment on this, in the sense that I think the way that I approached this whole sort of enterprise with Elena was that it's not really my place to tell someone else's family, for the want of a better description, sort of how they should order their house, so to speak. And so I've been really conscious this whole way through of not wanting to do that, just because I honor and respect the tradition and my friends in it. But I guess it would be, at least for what it's worth, my suggestion would be looking at actually how Elena and this group of people approached all of this, because there was a great deal of courage. It was the courage to step out and risk a lot of backlash, and boy, have we had some. I think I had to block about 92 people on Twitter the day it came out through various death threats and hate mail and that kind of thing. But it's actually daring to ask the questions that we discern, as the church discerns, to be important. And there are lots of people asking this question and who think it's important. There are lots of Orthodox Christians and theologians exploring this, talking about this, thinking about it, praying about it. And so it's sort of that encouragement to pursue the questions that matter. Yeah.
I think that is a good segue to combining maybe two of the questions in our Q&A. We have someone asking, how might they best promote the book to priests and to others who might dismiss the book based on its title? I think we've certainly discussed a little bit about how this is not promoting a particular agenda, but exploring a question. And then along with that, are there audiences outside of the Western world that you think are ready for this conversation? So, and this person also asks if we might imagine will this book be translated into other languages anytime soon? So maybe that's a question more for your publisher, but something to think about, how this might be promoted to other groups of people and even within parishes. Do either of you want to speak to those?
I would concentrate on this conversation being well overdue. And how long can one shy away from conversing? It's very important for us to talk so that we can learn how to listen for ourselves, listen to our inner voice, and to be open to what it might say. The question is, do we have a confident enough identity as Orthodox Christians to actually take a little bit more on board and to think about, I know the life is hard enough and it's easier not to, nowadays, considering I'd rather not listen to the news. But sometimes it's important to listen to this news within oneself and to live up to it. There's no need for act in the Orthodox Church. There's no need for it. I think the Orthodox Church is a very harmonious, very inviting and free and comfortable and a happy place to be in. We often forget about how happy it is, what a good news it is that we all received, and we are not managing to rejoice enough. We are soon to enter another great Lent of lack of joy, but let's rejoice outside of, or let's rejoice in Christ and in other people and in their richness. It's very difficult to say what's the best steps to approach it and how, but I think we are giving people an opportunity to think with these books. Yes, it's a provocative title. I don't know how to avoid not talking about women when we talk about women and not say it's ordination when we talk about ordination, because those two words are so provocative and so dangerously received, but they're just words. And we're doing just talking at the moment. Yes, talking is dangerous. Thinking, God forbid, is even more dangerous. Imagine the parish and they all think, which means they all have opinions, and they, God forbid, will share them, and then they will start talking and there is something will go. But we have to start talking. We have a gift. We have a blessing of thought process, of a lot of gifts, and we need to share them and we need to practice them. But most importantly, I think we need to help ourselves and help the others to live according to our calling.
And I think as well, emphasizing the broad range of voices in the book. So it isn't a book consisting of Orthodox priests who are men. It's not a book consisting of lay women. It's not a book consisting of lay men. We intentionally aim to invite, we haven't obviously gone anywhere near as broad as we could if we had a volume 2 and a volume 3 or that kind of thing. But the aim is to have different voices in that conversation. And so for the person who's going to find it helpful to listen to Father Andrew Louth, who's been a priest for a very long time and is a well-respected figure, then that might be the best chapter for them to start with. For the person who actually wants to think and do some biblical exegesis with a lay Orthodox woman, then they're going to want to start with Elena's chapter. And so I think a way of promoting it is that showing that there's a a different range of voices and ways into this conversation, that once you put them together becomes actually, I think, a very rich conversation, rather than just sort of hitting over the head with a point of view.
Absolutely. Well, we have a question here from Paul Ladouceur. He says that the emphasis among Orthodox interested in the ordination of women has largely shifted from the ordination of women to the priesthood to the revival of women's diaconate in the Orthodox Church. What do you think of this change of emphasis? Is this mainly a strategic move, or does it reflect a more fundamental theological position?
I would concentrate on the word revival. I think revival is essential for one's spiritual well-being and for the life of the church. I believe myself to be a part of the living tradition of the Orthodox Christianity. It's not written somewhere in stones and can never be questioned and can never be struggled with. It has to be digested on the physical level. And by taking it in, being open to it, we have to give something out. And we have to show ourselves to be worthy of being bearers of such an amazing gift. As far as the technicalities, and I'm not avoiding the question, I think it's not important, the steps. And I also have the same question, whether for some it might be a strategic move and for others, and whether, it's too short of a platform. And I thank you very much, Paul, for bringing this conversation. We don't know what's the agenda. We can only talk about our own agenda. And my own agenda is just to be brutally honest with myself. And if God brought me and gave me this education and brought me in this particular time, in this particular church, which is incredibly beautiful, it's a beloved church of mine with plenty of problems, and difficulties. But I don't want to leave because we have problems. I want to stay and deal with the blessed problems and make it into I want to contribute to the revival of myself, of my church, of my community that I belong to, because that's the commandment I received from God, to be constantly in the state of loving kindness, revival, and openness. Incredible challenge, impossible challenge, but with the help of God and with the help of other people, we might be able to better ourselves.
I think from my part on that, I would like to see both conversations happening, because I think they're different vocations. To be a deacon is a different vocation and call than to be a priest. And certainly I'm going to only speak for the Anglicans on this one, but there can be a sense sometimes to which it's sort of a precursor and a part one to a part two, as though part two is somehow the icing on the cake. And that's obviously just not what it is, and not what those vocations are. So I do think that actually keeping this conversation live is important too, because I think in a sense they're two different conversations.
And I think that's something in some conversations about reviving the female diaconate in the Orthodox Church. There's an appeal to tradition, but also an appeal to the diaconate, both men and women's diaconal service needs to be revived and amplified, and not seen as this kind of stepping stone to the priesthood. So that's going to take us to our final question, which is from Deacon Perry Hamalis. And it also focuses on this kind of other ways of ministry of women in the church. He says the Greek Orthodox parish that his family attends has recently decided to have only young women read the epistle during Sunday Divine Liturgies. And I might wonder about the young part there, but might this be a valuable approach for increasing the liturgical role of women in the church and symbolically highlighting women's participation?
It's wonderful. Women's voices and chanting, if learned properly and exercised and with an appropriate gift, so the voice is not high-pitched or not very destructive, it's irrelevant who reads it as long as it can be understood, to be honest. So whether a woman or a man are young or old, as long as they can eloquently read, I mean, it's really a technicality, but I know it's wonderful that you know, people were courageous enough in this parish and invite young women. It's a great honor. I'm not diminishing that. You know, when I was asked to read or to preach in the Orthodox Church, I trembled, you know, when I was asking, when you asked me, Ashley, to participate in this webinar and to talk about opinions in the Orthodox Church. I'm trembling, you know. It's a great honor. It's a great opportunity, but it's a huge responsibility. And you want to bring the right message, which is the message of Christ, nothing else, not your inner ego, or, you know, and not to sing a song that is expected to be sang. But it's very difficult because one has to be honest with oneself, and it's not very easy often. So I think whenever there are opportunities in the church for people who have gifts to share those gifts, for people that don't have obvious gifts to be welcomed, because every human being is a gift, male or female, young and old, and I wouldn't go into all the other categories deliberately, it's a shaky ground, but it's a gift to be the recipient of a wonderful tradition, a rich Christianity, and the Orthodox Christianity, which is beloved and most fruitful tradition. So the way we exercise it, the way we take a responsibility for it and for its revival, it's our responsibility for which we will give account when the time comes, and it will come. But before it comes, I think it's good for us to revive ourselves first and foremost, and to strive to be a better human being to start with, by exercising a little bit of more understanding, love, and compassion. And that will attract only love and compassion. The peace will only attract peace. And the love will only attract loving kindness. Even if it doesn't, it still creates more love and compassion.
Wonderful. Gabrielle, do you want to add anything to this reflection of other spaces, maybe the epistle reading or other spaces where women's gifts might be welcomed or brought to the fore?
I mean, I think it's important because there's something about being seen. I think what we see, the icons that we gaze upon, that the Orthodox Church is a really visual church, and so seeing women in whatever capacity and whatever age and all of that, I do think is actually really, really important, because we're also the gifts to the church that God has given. So I think that's really beautiful, actually, what they've done.
Wonderful. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our time, and I so enjoyed and benefited from reading your volume, and I know you both were involved in many other initiatives and scholarship, and so I appreciate very much that you took the time to join us today. I'd also like to thank all of our listeners for joining us today. Our next episode in this series will be March 18th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Its title is Addressing Intimate Partner Violence and Attending to Orthodoxy, a conversation with Romina Estrati, and we hope you all will join us again then. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.